Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Shadows of Deception. Wade Gonzalez stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, his weathered hands gripping the satellite phone as desert winds whipped sand against his tactical tent. At 42, his steel-gray eyes had seen 3 tours of duty, countless classified operations, and more death than most men could stomach. What they hadn't seen was this level of betrayal from his own blood. 20 years ago, Wade had been a scared kid from East LA, joining the army to escape the gang-infested streets that had claimed his father. His mother, Elaine Gonzalez, had worked double shifts at the textile factory to keep food on their table after his father died in a drive-by shooting. Wade's military career became her pride and joy, her son who'd made something of himself. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd spent 2 decades protecting his country while his own home crumbled behind enemy lines. Shannon Burns had been the beautiful blonde waitress at Murphy's Diner when Wade returned from his first deployment. 25 years old, with emerald eyes and a smile that could disarm a hostile situation faster than any diplomatic protocol. She'd played the part of the devoted military wife perfectly for 15 years, attending ceremonies, hosting other officers' wives, even volunteering at the base hospital. But perfection, Wade had learned, was often the most dangerous camouflage. "Sir, the satellite connection is holding steady," Sergeant Randy Owens reported, adjusting the communication array. "Your call to your mother went through without interference." Wade nodded, though his jaw remained clenched. The call had gone through, all right, and he'd heard every damning word. 3 days ago, Wade had attempted to call his 7-year-old mother from his forward operating base in classified territory. What he discovered was that his wife Shannon and her lover, a man Wade now knew was Casey Frost, a smooth-talking real estate developer, had been visiting his mother regularly. But their visits weren't social calls. Through the static-filled connection, Wade had listened as Shannon's voice dropped its usual honey-sweet tone to reveal something venomous underneath. "Your son's wasting his life in the army, Elaine. Playing dress-up soldier while real men make real money. Sign over the house before he gets himself killed over there." His mother's frail voice had trembled with confusion and loyalty. "Shannon, Wade is a good soldier. He's served his country with honor." "Honor?" Shannon had scoffed. "He's a glorified cook, Elaine. A chef in camouflage serving coffee to real soldiers. The man's a failure in uniform, and you know it." But it was Casey Frost's voice that had turned Wade's blood to ice. The threat that followed would haunt Wade's dreams, if he were the type of man who allowed himself nightmares. "Listen, old lady," Casey had said, his voice carrying the casual menace of a predator. "You'll sign that property deed over, or you'll be joining your dead husband sooner than planned. You understand me?" The line had gone dead after that, but Wade had heard enough. What Shannon and Casey didn't know, what Wade had kept carefully hidden for operational security reasons, was that Staff Sergeant Wade Gonzalez, the man they thought was a food service specialist, was actually Major General Wade Gonzalez, one of the youngest generals in Army history. His deployment wasn't cooking meals for soldiers. He was commanding a multinational task force in the most classified operation the Pentagon had authorized in a decade. Wade's cover had been perfect. Even Shannon believed he was exactly what his fake military records indicated, a non-commissioned officer who'd plateaued in the kitchen corps. The deception had been necessary for his family's protection, but now it would serve a different purpose entirely. Revenge. Chapter 2, The Architecture of Vengeance. Wade's command tent buzzed with activity as intelligence officers processed real-time data from 7 different conflict zones. His aide-de-camp, Colonel Fernando Greer, approached with a tablet displaying priority communications. "General, we've received confirmation on Operation Nightfall. The Joint Task Force is ready for your final authorization," Greer reported, his voice professional but curious about Wade's obvious distraction. "Delay it by 72 hours. Wade said without looking up from his personal laptop. "I have a more pressing operation to plan." Greer's eyebrows rose slightly. In 5 years of serving under Wade Gonzalez, he'd never known the general to prioritize anything above military objectives. "Sir, if I may ask." "You may not." Wade's voice carried the edge that had made him legendary in special operations circles. "But I need you to compile a complete intelligence profile on 2 civilians. Shannon Burns, age 40, current residence 1247, Maple Street, Riverside, California. And Casey Frost, age 38, owner of Frost Development Group, based in downtown Riverside. Greer nodded, making notes on his tablet. Standard background check, sir? Comprehensive. I want to know their financial records, personal relationships, medical histories, psychological profiles, criminal backgrounds, family connections, and every secret they've tried to bury. Wade's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard as he accessed classified databases that few people on Earth had clearance to use. I also need a discreet surveillance team positioned around my mother's residence immediately. Sir, that would require. I know what it requires, Colonel. Make it happen. As Greer departed to execute his orders, Wade began constructing what military strategists would recognize as a comprehensive battle plan. But this wasn't about territory or political objectives. This was about annihilation. Wade opened a secure communication channel to call his mother directly, bypassing any potential surveillance Shannon or Casey might have installed. When Elaine's voice came through, weak but relieved, Wade felt his resolve harden like steel. Me, Joe? Wade, is that you? It's me, Mom. I heard about your visitors yesterday. Silence stretched across the encrypted line before Elaine's voice cracked. She said you gave her permission to handle our affairs while you were away. The papers she wants me to sign. Mom, listen to me very carefully. Don't sign anything. Don't let them back in the house. And don't tell Shannon we spoke. But Wade, she's your wife. Casey seems like such a nice man. And they said, Mom. Wade's voice carried command authority that had once stopped a regiment in its tracks. Shannon is not who you think she is. Neither is Casey. I'm coming home, but I need you to be very careful until I get there. When will you be back? Shannon said your deployment wouldn't end for another 8 months. Wade smiled grimly. One of the advantages of being a major general was having the authority to redeploy yourself. I'll be there in 48 hours. Can you stay somewhere else until then? Maybe with your sister? Yes, I can go stay with Margarita. But Wade, what's happening? I don't understand. You will soon, Mom. I promise you that. After ending the call, Wade opened another encrypted channel to contact Lieutenant Colonel Tyrone Stewart, his most trusted operations specialist currently stationed at Camp Pendleton, just 90 minutes from Riverside. Stewart, I need a personal favor that never happened. General, you know I'm your man. What do you need? I need you to coordinate with civilian authorities to ensure my mother's protection, and I need you to begin preliminary reconnaissance on 2 targets in Riverside. This is off the books, but it's priority alpha. Understood, sir. Civilian targets. The most dangerous kind, Colonel. The kind that betray family. As Wade began outlining his preliminary strategy to Stewart, he thought about Shannon's fatal mistake. She'd assumed she was dealing with a nobody soldier who couldn't fight back from thousands of miles away. Instead, she declared war on a man who commanded resources that nations envied and respect that couldn't be bought. Tomorrow, Shannon and Casey would learn the difference between a soldier and a general. And by the time Wade was finished with them, they'd understand why some betrayals are too expensive to survive. Chapter 3. Homecoming Protocol. The C-130 transport touched down at March Air Reserve Base at 0300 hours, under cover of darkness and classified flight protocols. Wade Gonzalez stepped onto American soil for the first time in 8 months, but this wasn't the homecoming he'd planned. This was an invasion. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart waited beside a black SUV, his expression grim but ready. General, your mother is secure at her sister's house in Moreno Valley. We've established a discreet security perimeter, and she's been briefed to maintain normal routines. Surveillance on the targets? In place for the last 18 hours. Shannon Burns and Casey Frost have maintained their pattern, visiting your mother's house daily, staying for approximately 2 hours each visit. They appear to be conducting systematic searches of the property. Wade's jaw tightened. Searching for what? Unknown, sir. But yesterday they brought a locksmith and gained access to your father's old workshop in the garage. They've also been photographing documents and family heirlooms. The workshop. Wade's father had kept his most important papers there, insurance policies, property deeds, even some cash hidden in a false bottom drawer. These vultures weren't just trying to manipulate his mother. They were conducting reconnaissance for a complete asset seizure. Status on their background profiles? Stewart handed Wade a thick folder. Everything you requested, sir. In general, you're going to want to read Casey Frost's file carefully. Wade opened the file as they drove through the pre-dawn darkness, toward Riverside. What he found made his blood run cold, not from fear, but from the realization that his enemies had made this personal in ways they couldn't imagine. Casey Frost wasn't just a real estate developer. He was a predator who specialized in targeting military families during deployments. Over the past 5 years, Frost had orchestrated the financial ruin of at least 12 military families, using romantic relationships with lonely wives to gain access to family assets. His method was always the same: seduce the wife, manipulate elderly family members, forge documents, and disappear with property and savings while the soldier was overseas and powerless to intervene. But the file revealed something even more disturbing. Frost had specifically targeted Wade's family because he'd learned through Shannon that Wade's mother owned a 5-acre property in Riverside that had been in the family for 3 generations. Current market value, $2.8 million. Shannon's section of the file was equally damning. She'd been having affairs throughout their marriage, but Casey Frost wasn't her first attempt at financial betrayal. She'd been slowly draining Wade's accounts, forging his signature on loan documents, and building credit card debt in his name for over 2 years. "Sir," Stewart said as they pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, "there's something else." We traced Casey Frost's previous operations. He's done this exact same thing to families from Fort Hood, Camp Lejeune, and Fort Bragg. One soldier came home to find his wife gone, his elderly mother homeless, and his family's farm sold to developers. What happened to that soldier? "Suicide, sir. 3 months after he returned from deployment." Wade closed the file and stared out at the California landscape he'd grown up in. Somewhere out there, Shannon was probably sleeping peacefully next to her lover, confident that her husband was helpless and thousands of miles away. Casey Frost was probably planning how to spend the money he'd steal from Wade's family. They had no idea that they'd declared war on a man who'd spent 20 years learning how to destroy enemies completely and efficiently. "Stewart, I want you to coordinate with base intelligence and compile a list of every family Frost has victimized. Then I want you to contact every one of those soldiers or their surviving family members. Sir, they deserve to know that justice is coming, and some of them might want to participate." Wade's phone buzzed with a text message from Shannon. "Baby, hope you're staying safe over there. Missing you so much. Can't wait until you come home. Love you forever. 2 hearts." Wade showed the message to Stewart, who shook his head in disgust. "General, what's the operational timeline?" Wade looked at his watch. 0400 hours. Shannon and Casey would probably arrive at his mother's house around noon, expecting to find a confused elderly woman ready to sign away her life's work. Instead, they'd find Major General Wade Gonzalez waiting for them. "Phase 1 begins at 1200 hours, Wade said. "By the end of today, Shannon and Casey will understand they're not dealing with a chef in camouflage. They're dealing with a soldier who's forgotten how to lose." Chapter 4. Revealing the Enemy. At precisely 1147 hours, Wade positioned himself in his mother's living room, having entered through the back door using keys he'd kept since childhood. The house looked exactly as he'd left it 8 months ago, except for the subtle signs of violation: moved furniture, rifled drawers, and the distinct feeling that strangers had been treating his family's home like their personal treasure room. His mother's wedding photos had been turned face down. Wade turned them back up and felt his rage crystallize into something far more dangerous: calculated fury. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart's voice crackled through Wade's earpiece. "General, targets approaching from the east. Shannon's blue Honda Civic, Casey driving a black BMW. ETA 2 minutes. Copy. Maintain overwatch, but do not intervene unless I signal. This is my show." Wade heard Shannon's laughter before he saw her, the sound echoing across the front yard as she and Casey approached the house with the casual confidence of people who believe they own the world. Casey's voice carried clearly through the thin walls. "After today, we'll have everything we need to transfer the property. The old lady's signature on these documents will make us legal owners, and by the time her son comes home, if he comes home, it'll be too late to reverse." "Poor Wade." Shannon's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "He actually thinks I love him. 15 years of pretending to be the perfect military wife, and he never suspected a thing. Men are so pathetically easy to manipulate." The front door opened, and Shannon called out in her practiced sing-song voice, "Elaine? It's Shannon and Casey. We brought the final papers for you to sign." Wade stepped into the doorway between the living room and kitchen, his 6'4" frame filling the space. He'd changed from his desert combat uniform into dress blues with full ribbons and rank insignia. The sight of a major general in full military regalia was designed to intimidate, and Wade watched with satisfaction as Shannon's face went through a sequence of expressions: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally terror. "Hello, Shannon." "Casey." Wade's voice carried the command authority that had once addressed joint sessions of Congress. "I believe you've been looking for me." Shannon's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, her brain apparently unable to process the impossibility of what she was seeing. Casey, however, recovered faster, his predator instincts kicking in as he assessed this new threat. "Wade, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be deployed for another 8 months. "Interesting question, Casey. I could ask what you're doing in my mother's house with forged property transfer documents, but I already know the answer." Wade stepped fully into the kitchen, his presence dominating the room. "The better question is, do you know who you're really dealing with?" Shannon finally found her voice, though it came out as a croak. "Wade, I can explain. Can you explain this?" Wade pulled out his phone and played the recorded conversation from 3 days ago, Casey's voice crystal clear as it threatened Wade's mother. "You'll be joining your dead husband sooner than planned." Casey's face hardened as he realized their words had been captured. "That recording won't hold up in court. You can't prove." "Court." Wade's laugh was colder than Arctic wind. "Casey, you've spent years studying military families, learning how to exploit them while we're overseas. But you never studied what happens when you threaten a major general's family." "Major general?" Shannon's voice was barely a whisper. "But you work in food service." "Staff Sergeant Wade Gonzalez works in food service," Wade said, watching their faces as the truth sank in. "Major General Wade Gonzalez commands the 82nd Airborne Division's Special Operations Task Force. I've been using a cover identity for operational security. The man you thought you married doesn't exist." Casey's confidence cracked. "Look, there's been a misunderstanding. We were just trying to help your mother with some financial planning." Silence. Wade's command voice filled the kitchen like a physical force. Both Shannon and Casey visibly flinched. "You threatened to kill my mother. You've been stealing from my family for years. You victimized 12 other military families, destroying lives while soldiers were serving their country." Wade pulled out a second folder and dropped it on the kitchen table. Casey Frost, age 38, divorced twice. Both ex-wives filed restraining orders for financial abuse. Currently under investigation by the FBI for mail fraud related to your real estate schemes. Shannon Burns, currently maintaining $17,000 in credit card debt in my name, forged my signature on 4 separate loan documents, and has been liquidating my investment accounts for the past 18 months. Shannon sank into a kitchen chair, her face ashen. How do you know all this?" "Because when you declare war on a military family, Shannon, sometimes that family fights back with military resources." Wade's smile held no warmth. "I know about your offshore accounts, Casey. I know about the 3 properties you've illegally seized from military families. I know about the soldier from Fort Hood who killed himself after you destroyed his family." Casey took a step toward the back door, but Wade's voice stopped him cold. "Move another inch, and the sniper positioned on Mrs. Rodriguez's roof across the street will assume you're attempting to flee a federal crime scene." "Sniper?" Casey's voice cracked. "Lieutenant Colonel Stewart has been watching you for 3 days. We have photographs of you breaking into my father's workshop, video of you threatening my mother, and recorded evidence of your systematic theft of military family assets." Wade opened the folder and spread photographs across the table. "We also have testimony from your previous victims, financial records proving your fraud schemes, and enough evidence to ensure you spend the next 20 years in federal prison." Shannon was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streams. "Wade, please. I love you. I made mistakes, but we can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can. You love me." Wade's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more dangerous than his command tone. "You love the fictional character you thought you married." Staff Sergeant Wade Gonzalez was weak enough to forgive betrayal. But Major General Wade Gonzalez doesn't negotiate with enemies. Wade pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Colonel Greer?" "Execute Phase 2. Chapter 5, The News Titans." Within 30 minutes of Wade's phone call, Shannon and Casey's world began to systematically collapse with the precision of a military operation. Wade had spent 20 years learning how to dismantle enemy infrastructure, and now he applied those skills to civilian targets who had made the fatal mistake of threatening his family. The first shock came when Casey's phone rang. His bank's fraud department informed him that all his accounts had been frozen pending federal investigation. The second call came from his real estate office. FBI agents were executing search warrants and seizing computers, financial records, and client files. Shannon's phone buzzed continuously with notifications. Credit cards canceled, bank accounts frozen, and automated messages indicating that her employment at the upscale boutique where she worked was terminated due to irregularities in background verification. "This is impossible," Casey sputtered, frantically trying to reach his lawyer. "You can't just destroy someone's life in 30 minutes. Wade sat calmly at his mother's kitchen table, watching his enemies realize they were trapped. "Casey, you've been under federal surveillance for 8 months. The FBI has been building a case against your real estate fraud operations, but they needed one more piece of evidence. A recorded confession of threats against a federal officer's family member." "Federal officer? Major generals are federal officers, Casey. Threatening my mother constitutes a federal crime punishable by up to 20 years in prison." Wade turned to Shannon, whose sobbing had intensified. "Shannon, forging a military officer's signature on financial documents is also a federal crime, as is identity theft of military personnel." Lieutenant Colonel Stewart's voice came through Wade's earpiece. "General, local law enforcement is in position. FBI field agents are ready to execute arrest warrants on your signal." Wade held up a hand, indicating he wasn't quite finished. "But before we proceed to arrests, I thought you both deserved to understand the full scope of your situation." Wade opened his laptop and turned the screen toward them. "Casey, your real estate license has been permanently revoked by the state of California. Your business partners have filed emergency dissolution papers to distance themselves from the federal investigation. Your ex-wives have provided additional testimony about your history of financial abuse, and the IRS has opened an audit covering the last 7 years of your tax returns." Casey's face had gone completely white. "You're destroying my entire life." "I'm revealing what you already destroyed through your own actions," Wade corrected. "Shannon, your situation is equally comprehensive. The boutique fired you after discovering you'd been using their computers to access my financial accounts during work hours. Your credit rating has dropped to 425 after your creditors were informed about the federal investigation. And your mother has been notified about your criminal activities." Shannon looked up sharply. "You called my mother?" "I called all your family members, Shannon. They deserve to know who you really are." Wade's expression remained impassive. "But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what I discovered about your relationship with Casey." Wade pulled out another folder. "Casey, did you know that Shannon has been skimming money from your joint accounts? She's stolen approximately $40,000 from you over the past 6 months, money she's been sending to another lover in Las Vegas." Casey whipped around to stare at Shannon, who looked like she'd been slapped. That's not true. His name is Angel Forbes," Wade continued. "Shannon's been telling him the same story she told you, that she's married to a helpless soldier who's deployed overseas. She's promised to leave me and bring him the money from selling my mother's property." "Shannon." Casey's voice was filled with disbelief and rage. "You've been cheating on me while we were stealing from your husband?" "Casey, I can explain." "Explain?" Casey stood up abruptly, his face twisted with fury. "You've been playing all of us. You lying, cheating." "Gentlemen," Wade interrupted smoothly, "perhaps you'd like to discuss this with federal investigators. I believe they're very interested in crimes of conspiracy, fraud, and threat against federal officers." Wade pressed a button on his phone, and within seconds the front door opened to admit 4 FBI agents in tactical gear, followed by 2 Riverside County Sheriff's deputies. Special Agent Michelle Conrad stepped forward with official credentials. "Shannon Burns and Casey Frost, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, forgery of federal documents, and making threats against a federal officer's family member." As the agents moved to handcuff Shannon and Casey, Wade stood and straightened his dress uniform. "Shannon, before you're processed, I want you to understand something. You spent 15 years lying to me, but I spent 15 years learning exactly who you really are. Did you think a major general's wife wouldn't be subject to periodic security clearance investigations? Shannon's eyes widened as the implications hit her. You've known. How long have you known? I've known about your affairs for 3 years. I've known about your financial theft for 18 months. I've known about Casey for 6 months. Wade's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. I let you continue because I needed you to commit federal crimes that would ensure permanent consequences. You set us up, Casey snarled as Agent Conrad cuffed him. This whole thing was a trap. Casey, you set yourself up when you threatened my mother's life. I simply provided you with enough rope to hang yourselves. Wade turned to Agent Conrad. Agent, I believe you'll find additional evidence in Casey's BMW, specifically forged documents intended to transfer property ownership illegally. As the agents led Shannon and Casey toward the front door, Shannon turned back one last time. Wade, please. I know I made mistakes, but I'm still your wife. We took vows. Till death do us part, Wade finished for her. Shannon Burns died the moment she threatened my family. I don't know who you are anymore. The house fell silent after the arrests, leaving Wade alone in his mother's kitchen. His phone rang, a call from his mother. Mijo? I saw police cars at the house. Is everything all right? Everything's perfect, Mom. Come home whenever you're ready. Shannon and Casey won't be bothering you anymore. What happened to them? Wade looked out the window at the peaceful suburban street where he'd grown up, where his father had taught him that family was everything and betrayal was unforgivable. They learned the difference between threatening a cook and threatening a general. Chapter 6. Scorched Earth. 3 days after Shannon and Casey's arrest, Wade sat in the secure conference room at March Air Reserve Base, reviewing the final phase of his operation. What most people would consider complete victory, federal arrests, asset seizure, and public humiliation of his enemies, Wade considered merely the opening move. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart entered with a thick folder and a grim expression. General, the additional intelligence you requested has been compiled. You're not going to like what we found. Wade opened the folder to discover that Casey Frost's operation was far more extensive than anyone had initially realized. The real estate fraud scheme had victimized 47 military families across 8 states, not just the 12 they'd originally identified. The financial damage totaled over $12 million, and 3 more military personnel had committed suicide after discovering their family's ruin. Stewart, has the FBI been briefed on these additional victims? Yes, sir. Agent Conrad says the federal case is now classified as organized crime with RICO Act implications. Casey and Shannon are looking at 25 to life without possibility of parole. Wade nodded, but his expression remained troubled. What about the families who've already been destroyed? Prison sentences for Casey and Shannon won't restore their homes or bring back the soldiers who died. No, sir, they won't. Wade made a decision that would have surprised anyone who thought they understood military justice. Stewart, I want you to coordinate with Base Financial Services and the Judge Advocate General's office. I'm establishing a fund to provide full restitution to every family Casey Frost victimized. Sir, that would cost millions of dollars. I'm aware of the cost, Colonel. My family's property alone is worth $2.8 million, and I have 20 years of combat pay and investment income that I've never touched. These families deserve better than justice. They deserve their lives back. Stewart looked surprised, but not shocked. He'd served under Wade long enough to know that the general's sense of honor extended far beyond personal revenge. What about your mother's property, sir? With Shannon and Casey arrested, ownership reverts cleanly to your family. We're keeping the family home, but the rest of the acreage will be sold. Proceeds go to victim restitution and a foundation to protect military families from financial predators. Wade closed the folder and looked directly at Stewart. Colonel, I want you to understand something. This operation isn't about revenge anymore. It's about ensuring this never happens to another military family. Wade's phone buzzed with a call from Agent Conrad. General Gonzalez? I have an update on Shannon Burns and Casey Frost. Go ahead, Agent. Frost is attempting to negotiate a plea deal by providing information about other predators targeting military families. Apparently, there's an entire network of these operations across the country. Wade felt his blood chill. A network? Yes, sir. Frost claims there are at least 20 other individuals running similar schemes, specifically targeting deployed military personnel. They share information about high-value targets, coordinate timing to avoid detection, and even trade access to vulnerable family members. Agent Conrad, I'm about to make you an offer that the FBI would be wise to accept. I'm listening, General. I want to provide full military intelligence support to dismantle this entire network. My resources, my personnel, and my operational authority to ensure that every one of these predators faces federal prosecution. Sir, that would be the largest joint military-civilian operation targeting domestic crimes in FBI history. Then we'd better make sure it's successful. After ending the call, Wade walked to the window overlooking the base training grounds, where young soldiers practiced maneuvers that might save their lives in combat. These soldiers trusted that their families would be protected while they served their country. Wade had learned that trust was sometimes misplaced. His phone rang again, this time his mother. Wade, I'm back at the house, Mijo. It feels safe again. I'm glad, Mom. How are you feeling about everything? Confused, mostly. Shannon seemed like such a nice girl. Casey was always so polite and helpful. I can't understand how people can pretend to be something they're not for so long. Wade thought about his own 15-year deception, maintaining a cover identity even from his wife. The difference was that his lies had protected his family. Shannon's lies had endangered it. Mom, some people are very good at hiding who they really are, but their true nature always reveals itself eventually. What's going to happen to Shannon? Wade considered his answer carefully. She's going to face the consequences of her choices, and she's going to spend a very long time thinking about the lives she destroyed. Do you still love her, Mijo? Wade watched young soldiers training to protect people they'd never met, sacrificing their comfort and safety for strangers who might never thank them. He thought about the military families who'd lost everything to predators like Shannon and Casey, and the soldiers who died believing they'd failed their loved ones. Mom, I loved the woman I thought Shannon was. But that woman never existed. Shannon Burns is a stranger who stole 15 years of my life and tried to destroy our family. Love requires truth, and everything Shannon told me was a lie. After ending the call, Wade returned to his desk and opened his laptop. He began typing a classified briefing document that would authorize the largest domestic counterfraud operation in military history. The opening line read, Operation Family Shield. Comprehensive elimination of predatory networks targeting U.S. military families. Shannon and Casey had thought they were stealing from one helpless soldier. Instead, they declared war on the entire United States military. And wars, Wade had learned over 20 years of service, were won by the side with superior resources, better intelligence, and the absolute commitment to accept nothing less than total victory. The predators had made their choice when they decided to target military families. Now Wade would ensure they faced the consequences of that choice, systematically and without mercy. Chapter 7. The Network Burns. 6 weeks after Shannon and Casey's arrest, Wade stood in the Pentagon's Joint Operations Center, addressing a room filled with FBI executives, military intelligence officers, and federal prosecutors. Operation Family Shield had grown from a personal vendetta into the most comprehensive domestic security operation in recent history. Gentlemen, ladies, Wade began, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd briefed presidents and prime ministers. What began as an investigation into 2 civilian criminals has revealed a domestic threat of unprecedented scope. The main screen displayed a network diagram showing connections between dozens of individuals across 15 states. Casey Frost's plea negotiations revealed what we're calling the deployment network, a coordinated group of predators who specifically target military families during overseas deployments. Special Agent Conrad stood to address the room. The network operates with military-level precision. They identify high-value targets through social media surveillance, coordinate timing to maximize vulnerability, and share intelligence about family assets, deployment schedules, and personal vulnerabilities. Wade clicked to the next slide, showing financial data that made several attendees shift uncomfortably. Over the past 5 years, this network has stolen an estimated $47 million from military families. They've caused the foreclosure of over 200 family homes, the bankruptcy of countless service members, and contributed to the suicide deaths of at least 8 soldiers who returned home to find their families destroyed. FBI Director Russell Padilla leaned forward. General Gonzalez, what level of resources are you requesting for this operation? Full spectrum, sir. Military intelligence assets, financial crime specialists, cyber warfare capabilities, and coordination with international partners where the network has offshore connections. Wade's expression was granite hard. These predators have been treating our military families like a resource to be harvested. I'm requesting authorization to treat them like the enemy combatants they are. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Wade was essentially requesting permission to use the full might of the U.S. military against American civilians, an unprecedented application of resources that blurred the lines between foreign and domestic operations. General, Deputy Attorney General Bill Wiggins spoke carefully. You understand that domestic law enforcement operates under different legal constraints than military operations abroad? I understand completely, sir. Which is why I'm recommending we classify this as a national security threat rather than simple criminal activity. Wade clicked to a new slide showing Casey Frost's complete network diagram. These individuals have systematically weakened the morale, financial stability, and family security of active-duty military personnel. In any other context, that would be considered an attack on military readiness. Director Padilla nodded slowly. What's your operational timeline, General? Simultaneous raids across 15 states, coordinated arrests of 43 primary targets, seizure of all assets derived from military family theft, and complete dismantling of their communication and coordination networks. Wade's smile was coldly professional. I want this network eliminated so thoroughly that no one will ever attempt to resurrect it. And Shannon Burns and Casey Frost. They serve as primary intelligence assets until the network is dismantled. After that, Wade's expression left no doubt about his intentions. After that, they faced the full consequences of their crimes against military families. 3 days later, Operation Family Shield executed simultaneously across the United States at 0600 hours Eastern Time. FBI agents, military police, and financial crime specialists hit 43 locations in perfect coordination, arresting every known member of the deployment network within a 6-hour window. Wade observed the operation from the command center at Quantico, watching real-time feeds as predators who'd thought themselves untouchable were handcuffed and led away from homes purchased with money stolen from military families. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart reported from his monitoring station. General, all primary targets are in custody. Asset seizure teams are reporting total recoverable funds in excess of $60 million. Enough to provide full restitution to every victimized family. Yes, sir. With substantial surplus for the Family Protection Foundation you requested. Wade nodded with satisfaction, but his expression remained focused. Status on secondary targets? The network's offshore coordinators are being arrested by Interpol partners in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Their money laundering operations have been completely dismantled. Special Agent Conrad approached with a tablet displaying arrest statistics. General, this is the largest coordinated domestic arrest operation in FBI history. Every single target was apprehended without incident, and we've recovered evidence of crimes dating back over 8 years. Any word from Shannon or Casey? Frost is demanding to speak with you personally. He claims he has information about higher-level coordinating operations that could be valuable for prosecution. Wade considered this. Set up a secure interview. I want to hear what Casey Frost thinks is worth trading for leniency. 2 hours later, Wade sat across from Casey Frost in a federal holding facility in downtown Los Angeles. Casey looked like he'd aged 10 years and 6 weeks. Orange jumpsuit hanging loosely on his diminished frame, eyes hollow with the realization that his world had ended permanently. General, Casey began, his voice lacking its former confidence. I want to make a deal. You're not in a position to make deals, Casey. You're in a position to provide information and hope the federal prosecutor feels merciful. I can give you the names of the people who run the entire operation. The deployment network has administrators, people who coordinate everything and take a percentage of all stolen funds. Wade leaned back in his chair. I'm listening. There are 3 of them. They call themselves the Board of Directors. They've been running this operation for over a decade, and they're planning to expand into targeting veterans' disability benefits and GI Bill fraud. Wade felt his anger crystallize into something even more dangerous. These people weren't just stealing from active-duty families. They were planning to victimize veterans who'd already sacrificed for their country. Names, Casey. Orlando Klein in Dallas, Gustavo Giles in Miami, and Norman Haynes in Seattle. They each run regional operations and coordinate through encrypted communications. They've stolen over $200 million from military families over the past decade. Wade made notes on his tablet, already planning the next phase of operations. What do you want in exchange for this information? Casey's voice cracked with desperation. I want protective custody and a reduced sentence. General, these people kill anyone who threatens their operation. If they find out I'm talking. Casey, let me be very clear about something. You declared war on military families. Those families are under my protection now, which means you are my enemy until the day you die. Wade leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. I don't negotiate with enemies. I destroy them. Wade stood to leave, but Casey's voice stopped him. General, wait. What about Shannon? She doesn't know about the board of directors. She was just a stupid woman who got in over her head. Wade turned back with an expression that made Casey flinch. Shannon Burns threatened my mother's life and stole from my family for years. Stupidity doesn't excuse betrayal, Casey. Nothing excuses betrayal. As Wade left the federal facility, he called Lieutenant Colonel Stewart with new operational priorities. The board of directors would be neutralized within 72 hours, their operations dismantled, and their assets seized for military family restitution. But first, Wade had one more personal matter to resolve. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Shannon Burns sat in her federal holding cell, staring at gray concrete walls that reflected her gray future. 6 weeks of federal custody had stripped away her beauty salon polish, revealing a hollow-eyed woman who'd gambled everything and lost catastrophically. When the guard announced she had a visitor, Shannon assumed it was her public defender with another futile plea bargain attempt. Instead, she found herself face-to-face with Major General Wade Gonzalez for the first time since his devastating revelations in her mother-in-law's kitchen. Wade wore his dress uniform with full ribbons and decorations, a visual reminder of exactly who Shannon had betrayed. He sat across from her in the prison visitor room with the posture of a man who'd won completely and was now deciding how merciful to be with his conquered enemies. Hello, Shannon. Shannon's voice came out as a broken whisper. Wade, I've been hoping you'd come. I need to explain. There's nothing to explain, Shannon. I have 15 years of surveillance reports, financial records, and recorded conversations. I know exactly who you are and everything you've done. Surveillance reports? You've been watching me for 15 years. Wade's expression remained impassive. Shannon, I'm a major general with the highest security clearance in the military. Did you think my wife wouldn't be subject to periodic background investigations? Every affair, every theft, every lie has been documented and filed. Shannon felt her world collapse further. Then why? Why didn't you stop me? Why didn't you divorce me years ago? Because you hadn't committed federal crimes yet. Adultery and petty theft weren't worth destroying you over. But threatening my mother's life and conspiring with Casey Frost to steal military family assets. Wade shook his head. That crossed lines you can never uncross. Shannon broke down crying, her sobs echoing off the concrete walls. Wade, I know I made terrible mistakes, but I'm still your wife. We took vows, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. Till death do us part, Wade finished. Shannon Burns died when she threatened my family. I don't know who you are anymore. Please, Wade. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was confused and making bad decisions. Can't we try counseling? Can't we work this out? Wade studied her face for a long moment, as if he were looking at a stranger. Shannon, do you know what I've been doing for the past 6 weeks? I know. I've been coordinating the largest domestic counterfraud operation in FBI history. We've arrested 43 people who've been stealing from military families. We've recovered $60 million in stolen assets. We've dismantled an entire network of predators who targeted soldiers while they were serving their country overseas. Shannon's sobbing slowed as she began to understand the scope of what Wade had unleashed. Do you know how many military families Casey Frost's network destroyed, Shannon? 237 families lost their homes. 48 soldiers came home to find their children homeless. 8 soldiers committed suicide after discovering their family's ruin. I didn't know, Shannon whispered. Casey told me he said it was just helping wealthy people with estate planning. You knew, Shannon. Maybe not the full scope, but you knew you were stealing from my family. You knew you were threatening my mother. You knew you were betraying 15 years of marriage and commitment. Wade pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between them. This is your complete psychological profile, compiled by military intelligence psychiatrists based on 15 years of observation and analysis. Shannon opened the folder with trembling hands and read the first page. Subject displays consistent patterns of narcissistic behavior, pathological lying, and complete absence of empathy for victims of her manipulative actions. Recommendation: subject represents a permanent threat to military family security and should never be granted access to classified information or military personnel. They recommend you be classified as a security threat. Shannon. The military wants you permanently barred from all contact with active duty personnel and their families. Shannon looked up at Wade with desperate eyes. What does that mean? It means that even if you serve your prison sentence and are eventually released, you'll never be allowed on a military base again. You'll never be allowed to contact military families. You'll be monitored for the rest of your life to ensure you never again have the opportunity to betray the people who sacrificed to protect this country. Wade stood to leave, but Shannon grabbed his arm through the security mesh. Wade, please. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please don't destroy my entire life. I'll serve my sentence. I'll pay restitution. I'll do whatever you want. But please don't take away every possibility of redemption. Wade looked down at her hand on his arm, then gently but firmly removed it. Shannon, you destroyed 8 military families. You contributed to the suicide deaths of soldiers who died believing they'd failed their loved ones. You threatened to kill my mother. Wade's voice carried no anger, no emotion, just cold, factual finality. Some crimes don't allow for redemption. Some betrayals are permanent. What about the woman you married? What about the good times we had? What about the love we shared? Wade considered her question seriously. I love the woman I thought you were, Shannon. But that woman was a fictional character you created to manipulate me. The real Shannon Burns is sitting in this cell, facing federal charges for crimes against military families. So there's no hope? No possibility of forgiveness? No chance you could ever love me again? Wade met her eyes for the last time, and Shannon saw something in his expression that chilled her more than anger or hatred ever could: complete indifference. Shannon, I don't hate you. Hatred requires caring about someone, and I stopped caring about you the moment you threatened my mother's life. You're just another enemy combatant who's been neutralized and contained. As Wade walked away, Shannon called after him desperately. Wade, you can't just erase 15 years of marriage. You can't just stop loving someone completely. Wade paused at the exit door and turned back one final time. Watch me. The door closed behind him with the finality of a coffin lid, leaving Shannon alone with the echoing silence of a life permanently destroyed by her own choices. Chapter 9: New Foundations. 1 year later, Wade stood in the backyard of his mother's house, watching contractors put the finishing touches on a new workshop to replace the one Casey Frost had violated. The property looked exactly as it had when Wade was a child, except for the discreet security system that ensured no one would ever again threaten his mother's safety. Lieutenant Colonel Stewart approached with a final operational report. General, the Family Shield Foundation has successfully provided full restitution to every military family victimized by the deployment network. Total compensation, $68 million. Status on the board of directors? Orlando Klein, Gustavo Giles, and Norman Haynes are serving consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. Their entire network has been dismantled, and federal legislation has been passed specifically criminalizing predatory targeting of military families. Wade nodded with satisfaction. And Shannon and Casey? Shannon Burns was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Casey Frost received life plus 20 years. Neither will ever see freedom again. Wade's mother, Elaine, emerged from the house carrying glasses of iced tea for the contractors. At 71, she looked healthier and more relaxed than she had in years. The stress of Shannon and Casey's threats finally lifted from her shoulders. Mijo, she said, approaching Wade with his own glass of tea. I got a letter today from one of the families you helped. The Williamses from Fort Hood. They wanted to thank you for getting their house back. Wade accepted the tea and smiled at his mother. How are they doing? Wonderful. Their son graduated high school with honors, and they're sending him to college with the money you helped recover. Mrs. Williams says you saved their family's future. Wade's phone buzzed with a text from Colonel Greer, now his permanent aide-de-camp. General, Pentagon briefing confirmed for 1,400 hours. Secretary of Defense wants to discuss expansion of military family protection protocols. Stewart noticed Wade checking his phone. General, the Pentagon meeting? They want to make family shield protocols permanent policy for all branches of military service. Every deployed service member will have access to family protection resources, and any civilian who targets military families will face automatic federal prosecution. That's a hell of a legacy, sir. Wade looked around at his mother's property, the house where his father had taught him that family was everything, where his mother had sacrificed to give him opportunities, where he'd learned that some things were worth fighting for without compromise. Stewart, do you know what I learned from this whole operation? Sir, I learned that evil only succeeds when good people do nothing. Shannon and Casey destroyed dozens of families because they thought military personnel were helpless when deployed overseas. The deployment network operated for over a decade because no one had the resources and authority to stop them. Wade's phone rang, a call from Agent Conrad with an update on continuing operations. General, I wanted to update you on related investigations. Since Operation Family Shield, we've identified and dismantled 6 additional predatory networks targeting military and veteran families. Your protocols have become the standard for federal law enforcement. Any attempts at network reconstruction? None, sir. Word has spread through criminal communities that targeting military families results in complete life destruction. The deterrent effect has been total. After ending the call, Wade walked over to where his mother was chatting with the contractors about landscaping plans. She looked up at him with the same pride she'd shown when he graduated basic training 22 years ago. Wade, Mrs. Rodriguez wants to know if you'll speak at her grandson's high school career day. He's thinking about joining the Army. Wade considered the request. Tell Mrs. Rodriguez I'd be honored. What's the boy's name? Fernando Rodriguez. He's 17, good grades, wants to serve his country. Wade smiled, remembering his own 17-year-old self, scared and determined to escape the streets that had claimed his father. Mom, tell Fernando that military service isn't just about serving your country. It's about learning that some things are worth protecting, no matter the cost. Stewart approached one final time before departing for base. General, any regrets about how this operation concluded? Wade thought about Shannon sitting in federal prison, facing 35 years of consequences for her choices. He thought about Casey Frost, whose predatory network had been completely destroyed. He thought about the military families who'd received justice and restitution, and the future families who would be protected by new federal legislation. Stewart, I learned a long time ago that mercy without justice isn't mercy, it's enabling. Shannon and Casey made their choices. They targeted people who were serving their country. They destroyed families. They contributed to soldiers' deaths. Wade looked out at the California landscape where he'd grown up, where his mother still lived safely, where military families could now trust that betrayal would face swift and complete consequences. Some people deserve second chances, Colonel, but some people deserve exactly what they get. As Stewart departed and the contractors finished their work, Wade sat on his mother's back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of victory. His phone showed 17 missed calls from Shannon's prison number, calls he would never answer, messages he would never read. Shannon Burns had spent 15 years lying to him, stealing from him, and finally threatening his family. She'd gambled that her victim was helpless and weak. Instead, she'd discovered that Major General Wade Gonzalez was neither helpless nor forgiving, and that some betrayals carry permanent consequences. The war was over. Wade had won completely, and tomorrow, he would begin protecting other military families from predators who thought soldiers were easy targets. Because some lessons Wade had learned needed to be taught with absolute finality.